Hello to you, tabletop enthusiast. I'm Celine, brand and community manager for Game on Tabletop, the crafting platform for gamers by gamers. We decided to launch a new video series where we interview different actors of the board game and crafting industries. For today's video, our guest is Tim Chan, who is a photographer and cinematographer for board games. You might already know him from his YouTube channel. Hey Tim, thanks for accepting to be with us today. So I think you can start by telling a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a full-time photographer currently. I mostly right now photograph products like board games, of course, are like 90% of like my work, and then sometimes I'll book different events for like, not events, but like individual clients for like portraits and family sessions. And right now it's actually really hot for graduation sessions.
What brought you into photography and cinematography, and how did you end up becoming a board game photographer?
Yeah, so it's funny because I was never like a creative type. I was actually in like the science field for like my entire life. And then I was actually staffing for weddings. So I used to set up like tables and chairs. And I saw photographers that were always going around shooting, and I was always interested in what they were doing. So eventually I shadowed them during undergrad. And when I saw what they were doing, I just thought it was interesting, because they would just like, take a ring box and then put it next to a bonsai tree and just take a picture. And I was like, really? Like, this is your job? But then he showed me a picture of it and I was like, oh my God, this is insane. Like the level of detail, and it just looks like it's a completely different world. So I think that's what first grabbed my attention about photography. And then a little bit later, after I finished with that in undergrad, we went on a trip to Hawaii. And I had an iPhone 6 Plus at the time, and we were at like a turtle beach. And I just, snapped a couple of photos of like the waves crashing onto a turtle. And I just saw so much detail going into this really cool picture that I just took with my phone. And then from there, that's when I really got interested into photography. And of course, like during quarantine is when I really pushed it a lot harder. And I think it was about a year before that was when I finally got my first DSLR. It was the graduation gift from my parents. And then I just started taking pictures of board games. I just thought it was interesting. I was like, oh, you know what? I just want to take pictures of what I have at home. And it kind of just escalated from there. So yeah, that's how it worked out.
Who was, or maybe still is, your inspiration in this specific field?
Peter McKinnon has always been, from day one, my biggest inspiration. I watched him when he was like barely starting out on like 10,000 subscribers, and he's at like 5.5 million now. But he made one video specifically called a $1,000 camera versus a $5,000 camera. And when I saw that video, it was just so fun and engaging, and his personality is just like so like contagious. Like his energy is just like really gets me motivated to take pictures as well. So when I saw that video, I just wanted to make a kind of a standpoint of like my journey. Like, if I were to start this, I think I want to start at the $1,000 camera standpoint, and hopefully one day get to the point where, I can reach the professional level. And I just kept watching his videos. I kept learning from him. I kept absorbing, what he was teaching, and applied everything that he taught in like the lifestyle product photography field, and transfer that over not only to like board games, but also to everything that I do now, lifestyle, landscape, and all of that. So he's definitely been my biggest inspiration, both in photo and in video.
If you compare your first and your last board game shoot, what would you say differ, and what did you learn from it?
So the first board game I ever like kind of took seriously, took a video of, was Archmage. And I did this, what I thought was cinematic B-roll. And I used my first camera, and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I didn't know about frame rates, I didn't know about slow motion, I didn't know about stability. I just hit record and just started playing around with it. But I think that's so important because, a lot of us, a lot of times I get questions asked like saying, how do I start? Well, you literally just have to hit record and then, progress that journey from there. But what I learned big time was how to shoot with intention. Because before, I was just kind of just shooting everything because I thought it just looked interesting, I thought it looked cool, and I focused a lot on transitions. But in reality, transitions don't really make the point of the video until you have a story to it. So when I shot Archmage, I just shot random components out of order, and it didn't make any sense. But then compared to my latest Kickstarter, at least my latest cinematic video, which was on Bloodstone, so that one by now, like it's reached a professional level standpoint, I think, and I understand everything that I didn't before. I understand everything that I didn't before. Transitions, slow motion, using different types of gear, lighting was a big one. I didn't even use a light in the first time around because I just thought, it doesn't matter. It's just something that is not my camera. Whatever I focused on before was just my camera. But now, lighting, audio, sound design, and all of that plays such a big part in layering your cinematic type of video. So I think because of that, I was able to establish a more refined product in the end.
So you use props or real-life effects for your work? How did that start?
That's a really good question. It started from the very beginning. When I first shot my board game, I used different lights. I used like these little moon balls. And the whole reason why I did that was because I always wanted to accent board games and kind of just give them this lift, because I felt like it was more thematic. And for the first board game I shot, which was Archmage, it was very centered around like magic and mages and like spell casting. So I wanted to recreate that effect. But it's kind of hard to do that just with the board game itself. So I always thought it'd be more interesting to just add in different accents and props just to help lift it. But they were probably like 10 to 20% of the actual video shot. But for photos, they are mostly like the entirety of creative photos. I always accent it with some kind of prop or environment.
And actually, what would you recommend when you're doing something like this? When does a prop enhance the photo or the video, and when does it become too much?
I think that's a really interesting question, because I think it's hard to gauge. It highly depends on the components. Like for example, if it was strictly a card game, then I would help it a lot by adding in a ton of props. But the focus of every shot, like whatever is like center in frame, is always going to be the product. And usually the props are kind of like the foreground, like blurred out, or like whatever's on the side. Whatever is hopefully obvious to the viewer that isn't gonna be part of like what's offered like as you buy the game. Like for example, there was a game I covered called Hats. And that was strictly a card game, but I would add in a ton of different hats. But my side shots were always, the hats itself, and then of course the center would be the main card.
Do you use After Effects or Photoshop on your photos and videos, or is everything always real?
A majority of my photos are all in-camera effects. I don't stray away though from Photoshop. I think it highly depends on the shoot. Like for example, when I was shooting Marvel United and taking like thumbnail photos for that, I wanted to add in all of the effects from like Iron Man and like Captain America and all like the superheroes. So I think if you're trying to stimulate kind of like an over-the-top effect for your board game photos, then of course, Photoshop is needed. Or else it's gonna take 10,000 times as long to incorporate, all the lights and fancy flares. So I feel like there's this balance between efficiency and end product for Photoshop. But majority of my photos are all done with Lightroom by itself.
Okay, and what is the craziest thing you've ever done so far?
I would say it was with this board game called Vindication. So Vindication is all about survival on an island. And this was very, very early on, probably like my first year of shooting. And what I did was I carried that really heavy, massive 3 to 5 pound box game on a 6-mile hike up a mountain. And just thinking about it, we were already going on a trip to Mammoth Mountain, and so this is really nice national park. And everyone was asking me like, "Are you sure you want to carry that game with you?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's fine. 3 pounds, whatever." Like it's 6 miles. Like okay, but then I carried it anyway. and it was tough because I was carrying camera gear with me and I was carrying the heavy board game. But I made it, and I just wanted it for one shoot, which was just to get this survival like board game and to shoot it on like a deserted island and kind of like on top of a mountain to just hopefully stimulate the feel of whatever idea that I had back then to just recreate that theme.
What do you have to take in consideration? Like, obviously lighting is gonna be different. What's different when you shoot outside?
Lighting is probably the biggest struggle. I always, if I ever shoot outside, I almost always shoot during sunset or sunrise. Typically sunset, because that's golden hour, right? That's like the best time to shoot. And it's hard to plan that when you're traveling. So I always kind of scout the area that I need to go to before. Like if it's at a beach, then I'll go there before to make sure I have everything in mind, traffic, the amount of people there on a certain day, the best spot to be in, because when it's time to shoot, you need to go to that spot at that time with everything in mind, all the conditions, because if not, you're gonna waste a day, which I've done plenty of times before scouting it. Like I would get there and then there would be something in the way, like, oh shoot, tide is too high, so now I can't shoot here. Or now there's too many people and it's crowded, so now I can't get to certain location. So there are a ton of things you have to consider when shooting outside, and especially now when we're limited as well.
So I saw on your Instagram that you actually started working with Dice Tower. How did this collaboration happen? Do you have maybe complete creation freedom, or did they ask you to do certain things a certain way?
So for the Dice Tower, Tom actually reached out to me maybe around January this year because he saw one of my tutorials and he really liked the way I at least presented the material. So I think at least the way it came about was to just, hopefully try to make content that is unique, or in a way that shows a different perspective on board games. And that was my goal from the beginning. Actually, before even I did all these cinematics, I was always trying to just make a tutorial that was just faster, easier, and simpler to learn. That was always my basis before I even did any of the cinematics or pictures. It was always because I was always frustrated with board game rulebooks. I was like, man, like I really want to be able to teach this before. So I actually made like individual like vlogs or just like videos for myself so I can learn it faster the next time around. And then at the time, it was only a few people teaching board games, like Rodney from Watch It Played. And if he didn't cover a specific game, then you would be kind of lucked out. So I think establishing that from the beginning helped at least get my videos seen. They gave me complete creative freedom over my videos, which is really, really nice. It's very hard to find a collaboration like that, which is like, I'm super honored to work with them for that as well. But yeah, they gave me total complete creative freedom. Just make the tutorials exactly the way I do now. The only type of limitation, I guess, it's not really much of a limitation, but because he's like super flexible, but I guess the only limitation would be which games we would like to cover each month.
And I also noticed on your YouTube channel and your Instagram that you're very open on sharing your tips and tricks on photography and cinematography. Has this been a conscious choice of you? Were there any doubts when you decided to do this?
So I was always a teacher before doing board games. So I was always open to like team-based work, just like sharing knowledge. So I never cared about competition to begin with. And plus with Peter McKinnon being a big inspiration for me as well, he shares everything. So I just never cared for competition in that way, because I feel like it's a win-win for everybody. You share a technique and people learn from it, and then it just goes on from there. So it was a very conscious choice from the beginning. The only doubt that I had though was whether I was good enough to share certain pieces of knowledge. So I made sure that I learned things really well before I shared out there, and misinformation and all that. So that was the only doubt that I had, was just whether I was good enough.
So you mentioned already that you did a shooting for a crowdfunding campaign. When you look at pictures on campaigns for games, what do you usually notice? And what would you say is good or needs to be improved?
I think even before I got into photography, when I saw photos that were off-putting on certain board game pieces, like if you can see, I think what I see almost quite often is product photos done, but there are little nuances in the product photos that will kind of put me away from a certain campaign. Like for instance, if they have a set of components and there's a single, color backdrop, like a gray backdrop, but you can see like the rolls of the paper in the back instead of like a solid background. Stuff like that will kind of put me off, because ultimately I think crowdfunding, it's not a store, right? It's an idea, right? You're helping these creators fund an idea, and to help them envision, whatever they have envisioning. However, if from the get-go, the photos don't, put out, high quality things for your components, and it's like half baked from the beginning, it makes me a little bit worried about the project, all the way to the end, because there are so many steps after that campaign. So I think pictures for me, even before a photographer, were always important to show, the quality of the components and what they've invested in, at least.
I was also wondering, do you usually learn to play the games that you shoot? Do you play the games that you shoot before shooting them? How do you know what you need to highlight about a game in a photo or in a video? And what do you actually need to know before shooting a game?
I always, before, have to play the game, because I don't think there's any way for you to even take pictures or like do video without understanding how to play the game, for sure. However, with the workload that I have now, I have to learn it much faster, so I won't be able to play it as fully, but at least we'll get like a round through enough until I can take pictures of it, so it makes sense. So I definitely have to play the game beforehand. And in terms of what components to highlight, that's a hard one. I think the biggest thing I tried to focus on is I read up a lot about the designers and what their intention is in the game. So typically they'll put like different highlights on the back of a board game box, or at least in their campaign page, like a rough sketch of their campaign page. And they would highlight certain mechanisms like, card drafting or worker placement. And then in turn, I'll take those mechanisms and focus on that a lot for the photos and for the video. So it makes more sense and it matches what the creators themselves were envisioning.
On average, how long does it take you to prepare for a shooting and then do the shots?
I always ask for at least 2 weeks minimum. The first week is me prepping, sketching ideas out, ordering different props. And then the second week, in terms of photo and video, the second week would be the actual shoot itself, the editing. I think what takes me the longest is to film, especially tutorials. Tutorials take me the longest out of all of them, because you have to really learn the game and make sure you don't miss out on any rules. And I still make mistakes anyway by the end. It's so hard to avoid, but I think tutorials for sure take me the longest, maybe sometimes even 3 weeks to make one video. But photos, typically 2-3 weeks. Videos, about the same amount of time, 2 weeks. If it's like a rush timeline, I can make it happen in a week.
For creators with small to no budget, what tips would you give them to shoot their own content for their games? And what should they avoid?
I've run into this question a lot because the first thing that comes to people's minds are the gear and the limitation for that. But coming from someone who just started with like a phone too, or a camera, like I know what it's like. So what I always recommend actually is to watch your favorite filmmaker or creator on YouTube. And I've done a ton of videos about like helping different creators with like limited to no budget. Most of my techniques and tips don't center around gear because I have that in mind. They're usually just techniques or concept based. But what I always recommend is to find a creator that you love, find their video, and then really learn it, absorb it, and support the creator. And just, I always watch a video first time through just to enjoy it. Like for example, Sam Kolder, he's a travel photographer, filmmaker. I would watch his videos one time through. I really enjoy it because his videos are just amazing. And then I go back and watch it maybe 10 or 20 more times so I can really learn and absorb the transitions, the storyline, and what he's trying to tell. And one thing that I always try to focus on now is sound design, because I always kind of skip that, especially for board games. You think like, oh, they're just cardboard on the table, but then sound design makes such a big difference in the overall video. So I definitely just recommend, just bottom line, find a creator that you love and then learn from them.
And on the contrary, if I am a creator with a larger budget, how can I get in touch with you and how does it work?
So I'm super easy to reach across like all social media, Instagram, Twitter, email. My email is listed on every single YouTube video. So I'm very, very easy to reach. I usually get back to everyone within like 24, 48 hours.
Do you maybe sometimes refuse to work on certain games because maybe it doesn't suit your channel?
I usually look at the board game manual first to make sure it's a good fit for my channel and to make sure that those are games that I guess not only I'm interested in covering, but things that just work in terms of the type of filming that I do. So I definitely do a quick scan over the board game rulebook to make sure that A, we would work well together, and then B, it would fit for the channel. And then secondly, once that works out, usually they'll just send me the game, give me a deadline, and then I'll ask them like if they want any particular type of shots. Usually they'll say no, and then just go from there. Just go through my entire process of just filming and keep them updated as well. Like, oh, I have this shot done by this day. I have this set, and I will usually by the end also send kind of like a rough draft of like my overall vision. And then if they have any like fixes or edits, then they'll of course voice it to me, and then we'll fix it from there.
And last question, is there maybe something we haven't talked about during this interview that you would want to mention?
I think one, I kind of touched on it earlier, you kind of asked about it, was for limitations on gear. I know that's like the biggest question around like everyone's minds. It's just like, well, I don't have the camera, I don't have the lens for this. That's fair. I think that's a fair question to ask. But I think it shouldn't stop creators from creating, or like independent studios or independent publishers from making things about their board game. I think if the passion is there, if the willingness to just step out of the comfort zone of what the current vision is for board game style videos are, if you're willing to like push past that, I think it is definitely manageable. And of course, like I'm always open to questions as well. People ask me questions all the time. I don't like charge for it or anything. I always like help them out regardless of whatever question that they have. So.
Well, thanks again for being with us today. It was a real pleasure chatting with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for all the questions. I really appreciated all the specific questions you had about my channel. It was really nice to see.
Last thing, maybe you want to tell us where we can find you on the internet?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. Those are my main platforms, at Tim Chuan. Super easy.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for everything.
Bye.
Bye.
And that's it for a special interview with Tim Chuan, who is a photographer and cinematographer for board games. I hope you liked this video, and maybe if you have a suggestion on who we should interview next, feel free to leave a comment under this video. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to follow our next crafting adventures. Until then, keep on playing games, and we'll see you very soon. Bye bye!